Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. It's been a while again. I have been in the thick of adjusting to motherhood and just have truly not had time to sit down and film a YouTube video. Thanks for sticking around, sticking along with me. I promise there will be more videos to come. So this video is going to tell the story of my son's time spent in the NICU. If you didn't see my birth story video, I'll have that linked in the description. Everything that led up to the story I'm going to be telling today was in my birth story video, so definitely check that out if you haven't seen it already. And I just want to preface this video by saying that every NICU experience is unique. That is something that I've come to realize. No person's experience is better or worse than another. I have watched a lot of NICU story videos just because I did experience that and I wanted to see what others went through and, you know, how they dealt and coped with it. And that's something that I hear a lot of people say is like, my experience, you know, it could have been worse. Our baby could have been sicker, you know, our time could have been longer. I just want to say that if you had a child in the NICU, your feelings and your thoughts are valid and nobody can take your experience away from you. So I left off our birth story with how our son Sullivan went into the NICU immediately after he was born due to a cephalohematoma on his head. That is an accumulation of blood under the scalp, and they wanted to monitor him to be sure that it didn't progress, get any worse, he didn't have any side effects from it, etc. So the original stay in the NICU was from September 30th until October 1st, so Friday through Sunday, and we were discharged and sent home on Sunday. We were so happy to go home with him. I remember one specific memory that just sticks in my mind is the car ride home from that first time that we got discharged, and we were just so happy and so relieved to be going home with our baby. And I remember saying to Jordan that this would be a very different car ride if we weren't going home with him right now. And that's something that I still think about because, you know, obviously we did get readmitted into the NICU. We did have to leave the hospital eventually without our son, and it was the most heartbreaking, devastating thing I've ever had to endure. So on October 4th, it was a Tuesday, we had our first pediatrician appointment in the morning, and we went to that appointment, you know, thinking it was just gonna be like a routine thing. There was absolutely no thought in my mind of going back to the hospital or to the NICU. We were just going to the pediatrician, and the first thing that they did when we got there was take his temperature, and they were having a hard time getting a read on his temperature. It kept showing like pretty low, and they, you know, were like, oh, maybe he's just chilly. It was really cold outside that day, so maybe, you know, the walk from the car into the appointment. They decided to try a rectal thermometer, and they were getting a really low temp of 94.6, I think it was. They were a little concerned, obviously, about that. A low temperature in babies means that they may have a fever. Sometimes you think of a fever as just being a high temperature, but especially in newborns, it can also cause for concern when there's a low temperature. They did the rectal, and then, you know, we tried to warm him up. So they literally had us like wrap him in blankets, had like warmers on his body trying to get his temperature up, and nothing that we did for some time would increase his temperature. So the doctor came in and told us, you might be going back across the street. And I remember thinking, oh my God, we're going back to the NICU, and just trying to process that in the moment while, you know, there's doctors there and Jordan and everyone, and it was really overwhelming. Something that I learned later after being in the NICU is that the NICU doctors prefer a temp of 97.9 or above, so he was definitely very far from that. So they had us walk across the street. It was a quick walk to the hospital, and it took a while for us to get upstairs. There was some miscommunication about how we were being admitted. So we got admitted to the NICU, and we're in the room. We're trying to talk to doctors to figure out what is going on. When they took his temperature upon arriving into the NICU, it was back to normal. It was like 98. So we were like, okay, was this just a fluke of the thermometer at the pediatrician, or, you know, did he finally get warmed up from all of the measures that we took to try to get him a little warmer? And regardless, they wanted to monitor him for 24 hours. And so we knew we were going to be there for at least that long. It turned into a lot longer. They wanted to start him on antibiotics, and they wanted to run a few tests, like a blood test, a urine test, spinal fluid test, in order to see if there was an infection in some other part of his body that may have been causing the low temp. After 24 hours, he was starting to regulate his temperature. They took him off of the Panda warmer, and we saw that as good news. We were like, okay, the antibiotics are working. This is good. So for those first 24 hours, Jordan and I were at the NICU 24/7, literally. One of us would go home to sleep, and then the other one, you know, would be there with him, and then we would swap. So we were barely seeing each other. But, you know, in my head and in our heads, we were like, this is a short-term situation. We can do this for, you know, 24 or 48 hours. We can totally do this. Like, yes, we're sleep deprived. We're already sleep deprived. We've been home with our newborn for, you know, 2 days. So that wasn't a problem. We wanted to be there with him. I couldn't fathom not being there with him. We thought that it would be a short amount of time that we were there, and then we would be back home and everything would be okay. The next day, the urine test came back, and he had what they were calling a UTI, a slight UTI. It seemed like they weren't even really convinced that that's what it was, or it may have just been contamination in the sample. They weren't really sure, and they couldn't tell us for sure that that's what was causing his infection. So they decided at that point that they wanted him to be on antibiotics for 1 week. And I remember that day was really hard. Jordan and I went to lunch quickly, you know, while he was sleeping in the middle of the day. And I remember sitting there and trying to process the fact that we were going to be in the NICU for a week, that they wanted to have him on, you know, fluid antibiotics, hooked up for a week. And I just remember thinking, like, I'm not going to be home with my baby. And that thought was just devastating. It was so difficult, and I cried in the restaurant. I was trying to hold it together. You know, we started to talk about what we were going to do, how we were going to handle being there with him while still getting sleep. And, you know, we had a dog at home, so that was another factor as well. We couldn't just like stay in the NICU 24/7. And I'm sure every NICU is different, but in our situation, the staff at the NICU or the hospital did not allow parents to sleep at the bedside. So you could be there anytime you want, overnight, you know, but you were sitting in a chair and you could not sleep. So that was their number one rule. And obviously we respected that and followed that. So when one of us was there in the middle of the night, we were awake. And, you know, I remember feeling the sleep deprivation, obviously, but in the moment, it was just like my whole entire world was in that NICU room, and I wasn't gonna be anywhere else. I really, really struggled the entire time that we were in the NICU, and thank God that Jordan is in our lives, is in my life, and that I have him, because I truly don't know how I would have done it alone or gotten through it. Mentally, physically, he was the biggest support to me. I'll never forget how our time being together in the NICU strengthened our relationship, because it really did. On top of that, you know, we were obviously keeping our families updated about what was going on. We knew we would be there for a week, and both of our families just swooped in, came to, you know, our aid, and Jordan's parents came to stay in our apartment for a while, and, you know, they had every meal for us ready. They took care of our dog, just the things that we didn't have time to think about while we were, you know, so all consumed with what was going on with Sullivan. It was truly amazing to have them in our home and just be there and helping us and, you know, being like someone to talk to when we were home so that we weren't alone. And it was really, really great. We have the best support system, and, you know, we live 15 minutes from our hospital. So in that situation, like, we were so lucky. So that week of being in the NICU, we sort of developed a routine with Jordan's family helping us out and being there, and we would sleep at home at night because after 2 days of, you know, being there overnight, it was impractical for us to not be at home getting the sleep that we so desperately needed. And so we decided that we would sleep at home at night, and then the daytime up until the night would be spent at the NICU, one of us there all the time. So we would both be there in the morning. The doctor would do rounds at about 10 a.m. every day. Sometimes it was more like 11 a.m., 12 p.m. because, you know, things happen in the NICU. People give birth and there's, you know, a lot going on. So we always both wanted to be there for rounds just to get that FaceTime with the doctor, ask our questions, figure out what was going on. Sometimes, you know, we'd eat in the hospital cafeteria and then we'd go right back up. Sometimes we'd go out. Sometimes Jordan's parents would have, you know, cooked us something and we'd go home and eat it. And then one of us would go back to the NICU from about 3 to 6 p.m. and then the other one would come from about 6 to 9 p.m. and then at 9 p.m. that person would go home and we would both go to sleep. So a few days into his antibiotic treatment, the doctors were just throwing around this term viral infection. There was no diagnosis, there was just, he has a viral infection, he's not feeling well. Markers for his infection were trending up, and that meant that the antibiotics were doing their job, but his platelet count started to decrease and it was lower than they liked it to be. His was 52,000. They wanted to monitor it closely. They were gonna do a blood panel every day to check it. They told us that if it dipped too low that he might need a blood transfusion. So we signed paperwork saying that it was okay to give him that if those circumstances arose and we weren't there for whatever reason, or they just wanted to have that paperwork like ready to go just in case he did need a blood transfusion in the moment. So after about day 4 or 5, the doctor told us that if his infection markers continued to increase and his platelet count went up, we'd most likely be charged that coming Tuesday, which was a finish line in my mind. Like, I was like, okay, Tuesday, like that's a week of being in here, like we can do it. You know, we were already days into it at that point. His platelets needed to increase as well. And then we could finish out the antibiotics orally at home. We were so hopeful. We were so excited. We were so ready. We were like, you know, Jordan, your parents, you're gonna get to meet him. Like, we're gonna be able to go home again and, you know, put all of this behind us. As long as he was doing well with his temperature, with eating, with pooping, everything like that, then that was the date that they kind of gave us, and we got that in our heads. Jordan said he actually overheard a nurse one time say that what puts you in the NICU isn't what you stay in the NICU for. So for example, like his low temp was what put us in the NICU, but that wasn't what kept us in the NICU. So his platelets did continue to increase. They went from 52,000 to 62,000, 79,000, 92,000. They were getting up and we were so excited. We were like, you know, his platelet count is increasing. That means that he's fighting off this infection and he's getting better. On Sunday, October 9th, they did an ultrasound to check his belly and his kidneys because we kind of felt like he was a little off. He seemed sicker than when we actually brought him in, which was, you know, not a good sign. We were like, why is he just now like starting to act sick? And so they did that ultrasound, and the ultrasound showed a lot of air in his belly. He was uncomfortable, he was fussy, he wasn't eating as well. He was still like, all the digestive system things were fine, but he also started to have an increase in his respiratory rate, which had not been a problem up to this point. So seeing that he was, you know, having a lower respiratory rate, which means he was having trouble breathing essentially, was very concerning. They checked his infection markers again and they were going down, which means that whatever our little boy was fighting off, that he was still fighting it off, and it was not, in fact, getting better. The doctors told us that the Tuesday discharge that we anticipated would not be happening. and they were taking this day by day, and so should we. And at that point, I remember thinking, this is truly a day by day, moment by moment, round by round, and we couldn't do anything about it other than be there for our son and be there for each other. I no longer had an expectation of going home. Getting your hopes up and then having them crash down on you is the most disappointing feeling. So we kind of just said, we're taking this day by day at this point. So his platelets continued to increase after that, and his infection markers and his white blood cell count improved. They were doing a daily x-ray on his belly to see the air, and it was getting better, but it still wasn't exactly where they wanted it to be. So they wanted to give him a few days of belly rest. So we stopped feeding him completely, and we put an NG tube in his nose in order to suck the air out of his belly, and then they did an IV situation to give him the fluids that he needed without drinking milk. I'm gonna do an entire video on breastfeeding and pumping and formula and all of that because I have so much to say about it that I would not be able to fit into this video. But you know, when I was in the NICU, I obviously didn't really have a chance to exclusively breastfeed. I don't know how anyone would exclusively breastfeed during an extended stay in the NICU, because you can't really be with your baby 24/7 because you can't sleep there. So that was kind of off the table. And so I started to pump, and there's a huge learning curve to pumping that I am now feel like I am quite the expert at. Now being 3 months postpartum. Anyways, they had him on belly rest and they wanted to introduce food slowly. A few days later, they were finally ready. They felt comfortable with how the x-rays looked, how the air in his belly looked, and they wanted to reintroduce food. Reintroducing food, literally 5 mLs at a time. Like, it was a very slow process. We continued to increase his feeds every day because he was tolerating it so well. He finally pooped, which he hadn't pooped in days because he was just on fluids, which was normal, they said, but he finally, you know, reached that milestone and everything was looking really good. His infection markers were back trending upwards, and, you know, he seemed to be feeling better. Even the nurses, like, I remember walking in one time and, you know, washing my hands at the station, and this very kind nurse was like, Sully's doing good, like he's himself, like he seems like he's getting better. And like, just hearing that from a nurse it sticks in my mind. And just someone else was noticing as well that he was doing better, because at that point it just seemed like everything that happened, you know, things just kept getting worse. Things weren't getting better. No one was giving us good news. You know, all the news was just bad, worse day after day. And so hearing that someone else thought that he was getting better was great news. So they finished his antibiotics and they just wanted to, you know, monitor him for 48 hours after his antibiotics finished to be sure that he was doing well still and that nothing else would come up. And it didn't. He continued to do better. They moved us back towards the back of the NICU, which I realized at that point that being in the back of the NICU is a good thing. It means you're on your way out. It means you're graduating. And the day that they moved us to the back of the NICU, the person across the way from us had a little sign that said, like, so-and-so is graduating today. And I remember being there when the doctor came in to, you know, discharge them and talked them through everything. And if you've ever been in a NICU, there really isn't any privacy. The rooms are like curtains and you're very close to the baby next door. So we overheard a ton of, you know, people's experiences while we were there that really helped us put things into perspective for our situation and to stay positive. Which was a really hard thing for me to do, at least. And I know it was for Jordan as well, but he had a much better poker face of staying positive because I know that he wanted to be strong for me. But I know that it hurt him just as much as it hurt me. to see our baby in the NICU. I remember listening to that baby get discharged and just thinking like, God, I want that so bad. Like, I wanted it to be our day, and it wasn't. We were still like a few days out at that point. And after we got moved to that back room, there was a night where Jordan and I were actually there together, and they were like, hey, we're gonna move you into, like, it was like the West Wing NICU or something. We were like, oh, we didn't even know there was another wing, which is a very small wing, but apparently it's where you go like right before you get discharged when the regular NICU is really full and at capacity. So like all the beds were taken in the regular NICU, and so they had to move a bunch of us. You know, that night we knew that the next morning that we would hopefully be getting the news that we were going home. It wasn't really even a place where we could sit and be with him. There was like no chairs, really. There was very limited space. You kind of just felt like you were in everyone's way being there. And so we went home and we slept, and we just hoped that the next day would be it. And it was. The next morning, I remember waking up and thinking, like, today's the day, like, we're gonna go home. And I was just hoping so hard that nothing had come up overnight. I think I even like called. Yeah, I called in the morning, that morning, just checked on him and to see like really early how he was doing. And, you know, I said to the nurse on the line, like, you know, they said he might be discharged today. And she was like, yeah, I don't see any reason why he won't be. You know, they never want to give you too much hope just in case something does come up, which I respect. And they never really tell you you're going home until you're literally going home. And so we went to the NICU. We spent the morning with him. The doctor did her rounds, and she came in and she said, he's gonna go home today. And we were just elated. Like, I felt like it was our day, and it was happening. And it was so hard to believe. It was the best feeling ever, just to know that we were gonna bring him home and we were gonna like return to normal. There was no diagnosis or explanation other than it was a viral infection. We still don't know what that viral infection was. It could have been the UTI, they said, but I don't think it was. I think he was sick with a cold, essentially, you know, something like that. And he was days old, so his body couldn't fight it off. And, you know, not being able to give him breast milk in the beginning fully, because breast milk is full of antibodies that help your baby fight off infections. And that was really something that I struggled with while we were there, was, and even to this day, is like that I wasn't able to give that to him, and maybe that could have made the difference. I don't know. So now I'm an exclusive pumper, and we exclusively give him breast milk, which is incredible. And props to any mother that exclusively breastfeeds. Insane. Exclusively pumps and feeds your baby breast milk. Insane. And guess what? If you feed your baby exclusively formula, insane. Good job. You have to do what's best for yourself, and you have to do what's best for your baby. So they got his paperwork together, and they told us we were going home. And, you know, we went home to get a few things quickly to get him ready to go home, and we brought our car seat in, and, you know, they unhooked him from all these tubes and wires and cords that for 17 days he was connected to. Seeing him without all those things connected to him was like, he's free. Like, we felt like, oh my gosh, like he's a baby, like he's a free little boy. And, you know, I felt like it was just a breath of fresh air to see him like that. And we put him in the car seat, and we were like, do you guys like walk us down, or do we just go? Like, what do we do here? And someone did walk us down to the car, and we went home with him. And it's been every single day not in the NICU has been bliss. I mean, just you know, recounting it now in my mind, also being 3 months postpartum, the NICU feels like a distant memory because it was so traumatic to see him like that, to not be able to be with him all the time, to not have him home, to not have experienced the first, you know, almost 3 weeks of his life in our own space and figuring things out. Like, we weren't able to do that. And we know that that is where he needed to be in order to get better, but it didn't make it any easier. So having him home was just like truly incredible, and it still is. And like I said, every day not in the NICU is a day that I am grateful for, and I'll never, ever take him being home with us for granted. Now, Sullivan is doing amazing. Ever since we left the NICU, he doesn't have any issues or problems or, you know, sickness that followed him or stayed with him. He's a perfectly healthy little 3-month-old baby. You know, motherhood is hard. Learning to be a parent is hard. Being a first-time mom is hard. There's challenges. There's things that have come up that I had no idea about. There's, you know, so many things that we've learned being first-time parents, and I do really feel like being in the NICU shaped the parents that we are and the parents that we're going to continue to be. We don't take for granted having him, and I think that's something that in life, not just with a baby, but in life, like, you know, you can take what you have, who you have in your life for granted, and that experience truly taught us to not do that. And it's a beautiful thing. It was a hard thing, but it's a beautiful thing. That is going to be it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have experienced having your child in the NICU, my heart truly, truly goes out to you. You know, like I said at the beginning of this video, everyone's experience in the NICU is a valid experience. It's your experience. It's, you know, individual to you. But I know that there are people that are still in the NICU, and that's something that, you know, Jordan and I think about every time we bring Sullivan to the pediatrician, because it's right next to the hospital. And that drive, like going to the hospital, we made every single day, multiple times a day for 3 weeks. And I look up at that building and I think, like, there are still babies that are in there through that window. And, you know, there are still parents that are fighting every day for their baby's life, for their baby's health, trying to keep it together and, you know, bond. And my heart goes out to them, and my heart goes out to you if you ever had to experience a sliver of being in the NICU, because it is not easy. That's gonna be it for this one. Thank you guys so much for watching, for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye.